The legacy isn't about building something that outlasts, it is about connecting with people who understood why the building mattered in the first place. Jerry stared at the ceiling of his shared apartment in Brunswick, the paint peeling slightly above his single bed. The notification sound from his phone had woken him at 6:47 a.m., another LinkedIn job alert. He'd been getting dozens since completing his master's degree 3 months ago, but the responses were still trickling in slowly. He rolled over and grabbed his phone, squinting at the screen. The message was from his flatmate Tom, about splitting the electricity bill. Jerry did the mental math quickly. His share would be $67, leaving him with about $340 until his next Centerlink payment. Not ideal, but manageable if he stuck to his $15 a day food budget. The apartment was quiet. Tom, a perpetually optimistic surfer, and Sarah, a quiet nursing student, were probably still asleep. Jerry padded to the small kitchen and put the kettle on, reaching for the jar of instant coffee he'd bought from Kohl's on special. As he waited for the water to boil, he checked his phone again. No new messages. Part of him had hoped Linny might have texted, even though it had been 2 weeks since their last conversation, the one where she'd explained she was moving back to Sydney for a job opportunity. "It's not about you, Jerry," she'd said, but it sure felt like it was about him having nothing to offer. The kettle clicked off. Jerry made his coffee and sat at the small kitchen table, opening his laptop. His job search spreadsheet stared back at him. 43 applications sent, 7 interviews scheduled, 2 rejections, and 34 still pending. He'd learned to cast a wide net: junior developer roles, IT support positions, anything that might lead somewhere better. His phone buzzed, a text from his mum in Ho Chi Minh City.
"Con có khỏe không? Remember to eat well."
Jerry smiled despite himself and typed back quickly in Vietnamese before switching to English to update his job applications. The morning routine had become almost meditative. Search, apply, cover letter, repeat. At least now he had his PR. 8 years of uncertainty were behind him, even if everything else felt like it was just beginning. 3 weeks later, Jerry stood outside the One Schnitzel Company office in South Melbourne, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. The building was sleek glass and steel, nothing like the cramped co-working spaces he'd imagined. His reflection in the lobby windows showed a nervous but determined face, the same one that had stumbled through technical questions about React and Node.js just 5 days ago. "You must be Jerry," said a woman with short blonde hair, extending her hand. "I'm Emma, your team lead. Ready for day 1? Jerry nodded, trying to hide the slight tremor in his voice. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you again for this opportunity." Emma led him through an open-plan office where developers hunched over multiple monitors, the soft clicking of keyboards mixing with the hum of air conditioning. Schnitzel delivery apps and logistics. It wasn't exactly the fintech startup he'd dreamed of, but it was real work, real income, a real chance. "So you'll be working on the mobile app initially," Emma explained, stopping at a desk equipped with a MacBook Pro and 2 large monitors. "We're building features to optimize delivery routes and customer experience. The codebase is React Native, which I know you've worked with." Jerry sat down, the chair still warm from whoever had been there before him. His first corporate job, his first proper salary, $75,000, more money than he'd ever seen in his life, enough to maybe get his own place, to call his parents with good news for once. "The team's really collaborative," Emma continued. "Don't hesitate to ask questions. We'd rather you ask than struggle alone." Jerry opened the laptop, the familiar glow of the screen somehow more promising than it had ever been before. 8 years of uncertainty, gone. The future, finally, beginning. 6 months into the job, Jerry was having lunch with Marcus, the other junior developer who'd started 3 years ago. They sat in the small office kitchen, Marcus unwrapping his homemade sandwich while Jerry ate his usual $8 pho from the Vietnamese place downstairs. "So when did you get promoted to mid-level?" Jerry asked, trying to sound casual. Marcus laughed, a slightly bitter edge to it. "Still waiting, mate. Emma keeps saying soon, but the company's pretty conservative with promotions. Maybe next year?" Jerry's stomach dropped. 3 years. At his current salary, even with his careful budgeting, he'd barely have enough for a deposit on a unit in the outer suburbs by his mid-30s. The dream of a house seemed to recede further with each passing week of property price updates. That night, Jerry sat at his desk in his shared room, laptop open to a different kind of research, YouTube automation, faceless channels that could generate passive income. He'd been watching videos about it for weeks, AI-generated content, automated uploads, monetization strategies. It felt almost too good to be true, but the math was compelling. Top 10 construction safety fails. He could leverage his work knowledge. Daily productivity hacks for developers. Another angle. The initial investment was minimal. Video editing software, some AI tools, maybe $200 to start. Jerry opened a new Google document and started typing channel ideas, construction safety content. His day job would pay the bills, but this might be his actual ticket to financial freedom. By 2 a.m., he had outlined his first 10 videos and downloaded DaVinci Resolve. His alarm would go off in 4 hours, but for the first time in months, Jerry felt like he was building something that belonged entirely to him. The side hustle had begun. 8 months in, Jerry's eyes were bloodshot from another 3 a.m. editing session. His third channel had just been demonetized, something about repetitive content, and he was back to square one. The first channel about construction safety had barely cracked 1,000 subscribers. The second, about productivity hacks, had gotten decent views but no monetization. "Mate, you look like death," Marcus said, sliding into the desk next to him at One Schnitzel Company. "Late night again?" Jerry rubbed his temples. "Yeah, just side projects." He couldn't exactly explain how he'd spent the weekend analyzing TikTok trends and Reddit discussions, desperately searching for the next untapped niche. The breakthrough came in month 10, true crime, but not just any true crime. Unsolved tech mysteries, missing programmers, mysterious software, corporate conspiracies in Silicon Valley. Jerry had stumbled onto it after a random comment on a programming forum about a developer who'd vanished after claiming to have evidence of a major data breach. His first video hit 50,000 views in 2 days. The second hit 200,000. By month 12, he was uploading daily, his voiceover skills polished from hundreds of failed attempts. The algorithm had finally found him. Jerry checked his YouTube analytics at his desk, pretending to review code. Yesterday's revenue, $847. This week's total, $4,200. His monthly average had settled around $6,000 USD, more than his salary, significantly more. He glanced around the office, at Emma discussing sprint planning, at Marcus still waiting for his promotion. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd automated his way out of needing this job, using the same persistence that had gotten him here in the first place. For the first time since arriving in Australia, Jerry felt like he was truly ahead of the game. Jerry's first hire was Priya, a freelance video editor from India he'd found on Upwork, $8 per hour, but her work was meticulous, better than his own rushed 3 a.m. edits. Within 2 weeks, she was handling 5 of his channels. "The key is systems," Jerry muttered to himself, creating another Google Doc titled Content Production Workflow. He'd learned this from countless business YouTube videos during his research binges. Scale or die. By month 18, his team had grown to 12 people across 3 time zones. Priya had been promoted to head of post-production, managing 3 other editors. Kai, a scriptwriter from the Philippines, churned out compelling narratives about tech mysteries. Maria, a thumbnail designer from Brazil, had increased click-through rates by 34%. Jerry's role had evolved into something he'd never expected, CEO of his own content company, daily Slack check-ins at 9 a.m. Melbourne time, weekly team meetings via Zoom, profit-sharing bonuses that kept everyone motivated. The 20 channels had become 35, then 42. Revenue had jumped to $45,000 USD monthly, nearly $70,000 AUD. More importantly, Jerry could disappear for a week, and the machine kept running. He'd tested it during a trip to Vietnam to see his parents, watching the daily revenue notifications ping his phone while he sat in his childhood home in Ho Chi Minh City. He even considered adding a head of growth to the team, someone who could push metrics even higher, but a small voice cautioned him against expanding too fast. The domain.com.au alerts still stung though. Melbourne house prices had hit $1.4 million average. Even with his income, the deposit alone would wipe out 2 years of savings. But for the first time, Jerry could see a path forward. Maybe not a house in Torrock, but a decent apartment in Brunswick? That was starting to look possible. The Australian dream was still expensive, but it was no longer impossible. Jerry refreshed the domain app on his phone for the 3rd time that morning, scrolling through listings in Brunswick, Northcote, and Coburg. $600,000. That was his target. A realistic target, he kept telling himself. The 1-bedroom apartments in Brunswick were mostly around $55,000 to $650,000. Nothing fancy. Older buildings, some with carpet that had seen better days, kitchen appliances from the early 2000s. But they were his own space, his own door key, his own mortgage. He'd done the math obsessively. With his YouTube empire generating $45,000 USD monthly, he could comfortably afford a $600,000 mortgage. The banks would want to see 2 years of consistent self-employment income, but he was already past the 18-month mark. His accountant had helped him structure everything properly: ABN, quarterly BAS statements, the works. A small apartment, Jerry said to himself, looking at a listing for a 42-square-meter unit in North Melbourne. The photos showed a cramped but clean space with a tiny balcony overlooking a car park. 2 years ago, he would have been grateful for anything. Now it felt like settling. But settling wasn't defeat, it was strategy. Jerry bookmarked the listing. $600,000. In Vietnam, that could buy a mansion. In Melbourne, it bought him a foothold, a place to build equity while his content empire continued to grow. The Australian dream had always been about the house with the white picket fence, the backyard barbecue, the quarter-acre block. Jerry's dream was more modest now, but it was finally within reach. A small apartment, sure, but it would be his. That had to count for something. Jerry stood on his tiny balcony in North Melbourne, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise over the city skyline. 5 years had changed everything and nothing. The apartment was still small, 42 square meters of carefully organized space, but now it felt like a choice rather than a compromise. His phone buzzed with the daily revenue notification, $127,000 USD yesterday, across his network of 180-plus channels. His team had grown to 47 people across 6 countries, each managing different aspects of what had become Midnight Media, his registered company with an office in South Melbourne, ironically just 3 blocks from where he'd started at One Schnitzel Company. The apartment walls were lined with monitors displaying analytics dashboards he barely needed to check anymore. His COO, Sarah, a former McKinsey consultant he'd poached 2 years ago, handled most of the operations. There was a sharpness to Sarah, an almost ruthless efficiency that Jerry had initially admired as pure competence. He recalled a conversation where she'd casually dismissed the idea of a mental health day for a burnt-out editor, focusing solely on output. Jerry's role had evolved again: strategic oversight, new venture exploration, and the occasional keynote about building digital empires at business conferences. His bank account showed numbers that would have seemed impossible at 2.3 million AUD liquid, another $1.8 million in diversified investments, and the apartment now worth $780,000, thanks to Melbourne's relentless property market. Jerry could afford the Torak mansion now, the harbourside penthouse, the Tesla, the designer clothes, the expensive dinners. Instead, he made his own coffee, bought groceries at Coles, and found strange comfort in the simplicity of his small space. Rich but still Vietnamese Jerry from Brunswick. The apartment had become a symbol, not of limitation but of intentional living. The Australian dream, redefined on his own terms. Jerry stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, adjusting his shirt for the 3rd time. At 35, successful and financially secure, dating should have been easier. Instead, it felt more complicated than debugging a recursive function. The Hinge profile had been sitting in drafts for 2 weeks. How do you explain YouTube automation entrepreneur without sounding like a crypto bro? His photos were decent, the one from his business conference keynote, another from his Vietnam trip, visiting family, a casual shot in his apartment that carefully avoided showing just how small it was. Most compatible with people who value ambition and authenticity, he'd written, then deleted, then rewritten. The algorithm would probably match him with other workaholics who'd swipe left the moment they saw his tiny apartment. Jerry's phone buzzed, a message from his team lead about the quarterly review. Even his success felt isolating sometimes. His old colleagues from One Schnitzel Company had slowly drifted away, and his current social circle consisted mostly of business contacts and his remote team members he'd never met in person. Maybe he was overthinking it. Vietnamese Australian, successful, owns property in Melbourne. That had to count for something in the dating market. The apartment was small, but it was his. The work was unconventional, but it was profitable. Jerry opened Hinge and hit publish on his profile before he could second-guess himself again. Time to see if Melbourne has someone who appreciates a good rags-to-riches story, he muttered, then immediately winced at how that sounded. This was going to be harder than building a content empire. The restaurant was Sharon's choice, Vue de Monde, 55 floors up with panoramic views of Melbourne. Jerry had suggested something more casual, but Sharon had insisted. "If we're going to do this, let's do it properly," she'd texted. She was undeniably stunning. Long dark hair, designer dress that probably cost more than Jerry's monthly grocery budget, the kind of effortless elegance that came from never having to check price tags. Her family owned a chain of medical practices across Melbourne's eastern suburbs. "So you do YouTube?" Sharon asked, swirling her $30 glass of wine. "That's interesting. My brother tried that once. Gaming videos or something. Didn't really go anywhere." Jerry smiled politely. "It's more of a content business now. We produce educational material across multiple channels. Right. She glanced around the restaurant. This place has a 6-month waiting list, but Daddy knows the owner. Connections, you know? The conversation continued like this, Sharon name-dropping restaurants, holidays to Europe, her new BMW. She spoke of her life as a series of perfectly curated experiences, each one a step up from the last. When Jerry mentioned his small apartment, she laughed. Oh, you're one of those minimalist types. How very zen of you. Not really minimalist, Jerry said, just practical. Well, when you're ready to upgrade, Daddy's friend is a property developer in Torok. I could introduce you. She pulled out her phone to show him photos of luxury developments. This one's only $3.2 million, completely worth it for the lifestyle. Jerry nodded, watching Sharon's manicured fingers swipe through million-dollar listings like they were breakfast options. Beautiful, intelligent, successful, everything that looked perfect on paper. But something felt hollow, like watching one of his automated videos play out. All the right elements, but missing the human connection that made it real. The marble countertops are imported from Italy, Sharon continued, zooming in on a kitchen photo. And look at this walk-in wardrobe. It's bigger than most people's bedrooms. Jerry thought about his own wardrobe, a small built-in unit where he'd organized his clothes with the same efficiency he applied to his business operations. It's impressive, he said, meaning it, but not feeling it. I'm actually looking at places in South Yara myself, Sharon said, finally putting her phone down. Daddy thinks it's a good investment, and honestly, I'm so over living with roommates, even if they are my best friends from uni. What do you do for work? Jerry asked, genuinely curious. They'd been talking for an hour, and he still wasn't sure. Oh, I help manage Daddy's practices. Marketing, social media, that sort of thing. Nothing too stressful. She laughed. I mean, why work yourself to death when you don't have to, right? Jerry smiled and nodded, but something twisted in his chest. He thought about his 18-hour days building his first channel, the months of failure, the satisfaction of finally breaking through. The journey had been everything. The destination was just a bonus. What about Jerry? Sharon asked. What drives Jerry? Besides money, I mean. Jerry paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. It was the first question all evening that felt like it mattered, but somehow he sensed his real answer wouldn't translate. I want to build up my legacy, Jerry said, setting down his fork. The words felt important, weighty in a way that the evening's conversation hadn't been until now. Sharon's perfectly glossed lips curved into a smirk. Legacy? She let out a small laugh, the kind that suggested she found the concept charmingly naive. What, like having Jerry's name on a building or something? Not exactly. Jerry searched for the right words. I mean creating something that matters, something that outlasts me. Maybe it's the content empire, maybe it's something else entirely, but I want to know that I built something meaningful. Sharon tilted her head, her expression amused but distant. That's very philosophical of Jerry. She picked up her wineglass, taking a slow sip. I suppose that's nice, but honestly, I think you're overthinking it. Life's about enjoying yourself, having nice things, good experiences. Why stress about some grand legacy when you could just live? Jerry felt a familiar disconnect, like trying to explain code to someone who'd never seen a computer. But don't you want to create something? Leave your mark somehow. I suppose Daddy's already done that with the medical practices, Sharon said with a casual shrug. Besides, I'll probably inherit all that anyway. Legacy sorted. She smiled brightly, as if she'd just solved a complex equation. Jerry nodded slowly, understanding with crystalline clarity that they were speaking entirely different languages, even though they were both using English. The date ended with polite pleasantries, and a promise to definitely do this again soon, that both of them knew was hollow. Jerry walked Sharon to her BMW, watched her drive away into the Melbourne night, then took the tram back to his small apartment. But instead of going upstairs, Jerry found himself walking, past the late-night Vietnamese restaurants of Victoria Street, their rich aromas a comforting presence in the cool air, through the quiet streets of Fitzroy, eventually ending up at the Yarra River, the city lights reflected off the water, and for the first time in years, Jerry felt truly alone. His phone buzzed, a notification that one of his channels had hit 500,000 subscribers, another milestone in his empire. But sitting on the riverbank, Jerry realized something unsettling. He'd built a machine that could run without him, accumulated wealth beyond his wildest dreams, but he had no one to share it with who understood the journey. Sharon represented everything he thought he'd wanted: beauty, sophistication, the social validation that came with dating someone from Melbourne's elite. But her world felt as automated as his YouTube channels. Pretty, functional, but ultimately soulless. Jerry opened his phone and deleted Sharon's number. Then on impulse, he opened a new document and began typing. New channel idea, stories of migration, real people, real journeys, real dreams. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about algorithms or revenue. He was thinking about the Vietnamese grandmother who'd served him pho that morning, the Sudanese taxi driver who'd recognized his accent, the Italian barista who'd asked about his homeland. Their stories mattered more than marble countertops. Maybe his legacy wasn't about building an empire. Maybe it was about building bridges. Jerry stood up, pocketed his phone, and walked home with a strange sense of purpose he hadn't felt since those first desperate days in Brunswick. The Australian dream was evolving again, and this time it felt like his own. The next morning, Jerry sat in his usual cafe on Smith Street, but instead of his laptop showing analytics dashboards, he had a notebook. Analog, old school. He was sketching out something different. Stories of Migration wasn't just another channel, it was personal. He started with a list of people he'd met but never really talked to: Mrs. Chen from the dry cleaner who'd fled China in the 1980s, Ahmed from the corner shop who'd arrived from Somalia as a teenager, even Tom, his old flatmate whose parents had emigrated from Ireland decades ago. Jerry's phone rang. Sarah, his COO. "Hey, the Q3 numbers are looking incredible," she said. "We're on track for $180K USD this month. Also, that meeting with the Netflix exec got moved to Thursday." "Actually, Sarah, I want to try something new," Jerry said, surprising himself with his certainty. "I want to start a documentary series. Real stories, not algorithm-driven content." There was a pause. "That's risky. Documentation doesn't perform like mystery content. The CPM would be terrible." "I know." Jerry looked out the window at the morning commuters, each carrying their own invisible history. But what if success isn't just about revenue? After hanging up, Jerry walked to the Vietnamese restaurant where he'd eaten countless meals. The smell of pho broth and fresh herbs was a familiar comfort. The owner, Mrs. Nguyen, was behind the counter as always. "Mrs. Nguyen," he said in Vietnamese, "I was wondering if you'd like to tell your story." She looked up, surprised. In all these years, no one had asked her about anything beyond soup preferences. "My story," she repeated. "What's interesting about an old woman making pho?" Jerry smiled. "Everything." For the first time since building his empire, Jerry felt like he was about to create something that mattered more than money. The Australian dream was shifting again, from survival to success to something deeper: significance. Mrs. Nguyen's interview was scheduled for the following Saturday. Jerry arrived early, setting up his camera equipment in the small restaurant after closing time. The story she told, fleeing Vietnam by boat, losing her first husband to illness, rebuilding her life one bowl of pho at a time, was more gripping than any tech mystery he'd ever produced. "You remind me of my son," Mrs. Nguyen said, as Jerry packed up his equipment. "Always working, always thinking about the future. But he found a good wife. You should meet her friend. She helps me with the English paperwork sometimes." Jerry smiled politely. "That's kind, but I'm quite busy with work." Work. Mrs. Nguyen waved her hand dismissively. "Isabella is smart girl. She helped families who come here from Cambodia, from Afghanistan. Very beautiful, but more important, she has good heart." The next Tuesday, Jerry was back at the restaurant for lunch when a woman with warm brown eyes and shoulder-length black hair sat at the counter beside him. She was reviewing case files, a red pen making careful notes on documents about refugee settlement. "You must be Jerry," she said without looking up. "Mrs. Nguyen has told me approximately 17 times that I should meet you." Jerry laughed. "Only 17. I got the full sales pitch yesterday." She finally looked up, and her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way that Sharon's never had. "I'm Isabella. And before you ask, yes, I'm the social worker. Yes, I work with refugee families. And no, I don't usually let elderly Vietnamese women set me up on blind dates." "What changed your mind?" Isabella gestured to her papers. "One of the families I work with, the Khans from Afghanistan. The father was telling me about this Australian man making videos about their stories. Real stories, not just content. That was Jerry, wasn't it?" Jerry nodded, suddenly seeing his work through different eyes. "Just started, actually. Mrs. Nguyen was my first interview." "That's beautiful work," Isabella said, and Jerry realized she meant it. "Those stories matter. My parents came here from Cambodia after the war, as refugees. They lost everything, so I know how much it means to have your journey acknowledged, to feel seen." For the first time in months, Jerry forgot to check his phone for revenue notifications. Over the following weeks, Jerry found himself timing his restaurant visits around Isabella's schedule. She came in every Tuesday and Thursday after work, always with a stack of case files and a patient smile for Mrs. Nguyen's endless matchmaking attempts. "You know she's charging you extra for the pho," Isabella said one afternoon, watching Mrs. Nguyen ladle an unusually generous portion into Jerry's bowl. The matchmaker surcharge. Jerry laughed. Worth it. Besides, I think she's more invested in this than we are. Speak for yourself, Isabella said, then blushed slightly at her own boldness. Their conversations flowed naturally, Isabella sharing stories about the refugee families she helped, their struggles with language barriers, cultural adaptation, and navigating complex systems. She understood the immigrant experience from both sides, having grown up in Melbourne with parents who'd endured immense hardship to build a new life here. I have a family whose mother might be perfect for your series, Isabella said one evening as they walked along the Yarra after dinner. They're Burmese Rohingya, arrived via Malaysia, an incredible story of survival and finding a new home against all odds. Would you introduce us? Jerry asked. Only if you promise to tell it properly, not like those feel-good segments on the news that make everything seem simple. Jerry stopped walking. You don't trust Jerry to do it justice. Isabella turned to face him, her expression serious. I trust Jerry because Jerry asked Mrs. Nguyen about her story, when Jerry could have just eaten Jerry's foes and left, and because Jerry's work with Midnight Media proves Jerry understands how to tell complex stories. That tells me something about who Jerry is. They stood there by the river, the city lights reflecting in the water, and Jerry realized he'd been wrong about legacy. It wasn't about building something that outlasted him. It was about connecting with people who understood why the building mattered in the first place. Isabella, he said, would you like to help me with the series? Not just introductions, but as a co-producer? Her smile lit up the riverside. I thought Jerry'd never ask. 6 months later, stories of migration had become something neither Jerry nor Isabella had expected. What started as a passion project had evolved into Melbourne's most talked-about documentary series, with episodes regularly hitting 2 million views and drawing attention from SBS and the ABC. But more importantly, Jerry and Isabella had found their rhythm. She had an intuitive understanding of how to make people comfortable on camera and delve into sensitive topics with empathy, while Jerry's technical skills and storytelling experience brought their subjects' experiences to life with cinematic quality. We make a good team, Isabella said, reviewing footage from their latest interview. A Sudanese engineer who'd driven taxis for 5 years before finally getting his qualifications recognized. They were in Jerry's apartment, which had somehow become their unofficial editing studio. Isabella had gradually claimed the small dining table as her workspace, her social work notes, mixing with Jerry's production notes in a way that felt surprisingly natural. You know, Jerry said, looking up from his timeline, I keep thinking about something Mrs. Nguyen said when we interviewed her. What's that? She said the hardest part about immigrating wasn't leaving home, it was learning to build a new one. Jerry saved his work and turned to face Isabella. I think I've been so focused on building things, channels, businesses, wealth, that I forgot about building a home. Isabella smiled, reaching across to squeeze his hand. Maybe that's because Jerry was waiting for the right person to build it with. Outside, Melbourne's winter rain drummed against the windows of Jerry's small apartment, but inside, everything felt exactly the right size. The Australian dream was finally taking shape, and it looked nothing like he'd originally imagined. It looked like love, purpose, and a story worth telling. Jerry woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Isabella humming in his tiny kitchen. It was a Saturday morning 8 months after their first official date, and she'd started leaving clothes in his wardrobe, a toothbrush by the sink, her favorite tea in the cupboard. Jerry's mother called, Isabella said, handing him a mug. She wants to know when she's meeting me properly. Jerry groaned. His parents had been dropping increasingly unsubtle hints about grandchildren during their weekly video calls. She's relentless. Fair warning, she's already started planning Jerry's wedding. Smart woman, Isabella laughed. I like her already. Their latest episode had premiered the night before, the story of Hassan, a Syrian doctor who'd spent 3 years retraining to practice medicine in Australia. The comments section was flooded with responses from other immigrant doctors, nurses, engineers, all sharing their own recognition battles. Look at this, Isabella said, scrolling through her phone. Someone started a support group for credential recognition because of Hassan's story. That's incredible. Jerry pulled her closer on the small couch. Jerry realizes what we've built here is bigger than anything Jerry did before, right? Those 20 channels made money, but this is actually changing things. Isabella corrected. We built this. Jerry's phone buzzed with a notification from his business manager. The automated channels were still generating massive revenues, $200,000 USD last month, but he barely checked the numbers anymore. The money had become background noise to something more meaningful. I've been thinking, Jerry said carefully, about us, about this. He gestured around the apartment. It's getting pretty cramped. Isabella raised an eyebrow. Jerry Chen, Are Jerry asking me to move in with Jerry officially, or Jerry trying to upgrade to a bigger place? Both, Jerry grinned. I saw a 2-bedroom in Fitzroy yesterday. Nothing fancy, but it has space for a proper editing suite. And maybe, he paused, suddenly nervous. Maybe space for whatever comes next. Isabella set down her coffee and turned to face him fully. Whatever comes next. I love you, Jerry said simply. And I think I'm ready to stop building a life and start living one, with you. Isabella's answer was a kiss that tasted like coffee and possibility. 3 months later, Jerry and Isabella stood in the doorway of their new 2-bedroom apartment in Fitzroy, surrounded by boxes and the controlled chaos of moving day. The space felt enormous compared to Jerry's old place, an actual separate bedroom, a kitchen you could cook in without bumping into the fridge, and best of all, a second bedroom they'd converted into a proper editing studio. I can't believe we fit all Jerry's equipment in here, Isabella said, watching Jerry set up his monitors in their new workspace. It's like mission control. Our workspace, Jerry corrected, plugging in Isabella's laptop beside his setup. We're partners now, remember? The documentary series had caught the attention of a streaming platform. Netflix had offered them a deal for a full season, 12 episodes with proper funding, a real crew, and editorial independence. Jerry had negotiated the contract with the same intensity he'd once reserved for optimizing YouTube algorithms. Speaking of partnerships, Isabella said, pulling out her phone, I got a call from the Department of Social Services today. They want to create educational modules around our episodes, use them to help new refugee arrivals understand their rights and access support services. Jerry stopped what he was doing and stared at her. Are you serious? Dead serious. They're talking about rolling it out statewide next year. Isabella's excitement was infectious. Our stories could be used to directly help people, Jerry. Proper legacy territory. That evening, they sat on their small balcony with takeaway Vietnamese food, watching the Melbourne skyline light up. Jerry's phone showed the usual notifications, revenue updates, subscriber counts, business metrics, but he'd stopped checking them compulsively months ago. You know what's funny? Jerry said. Chopsticks paused halfway to his mouth. I spent years thinking success meant having enough money to buy a house. Then I thought it meant having enough money to buy whatever I wanted. But this, he gestured between them, at their shared space, at the edit timeline visible through their studio window. This feels like the first time I've actually made it. Isabella smiled, leaning against his shoulder. Made it where? Home, Jerry said simply. I think I finally made it home. 2 weeks before their Netflix premiere, Jerry's phone rang at 3 a.m. The number was international, Vietnam. Jerry, his father's voice was strained, speaking in Vietnamese. Your mother, she's in the hospital. Heart attack. Jerry needs to come home. Isabella found him 20 minutes later, sitting on their couch in the dark, plane tickets already booked on his laptop screen. I have to go, he said numbly. The premiere, the Netflix deal, everything we've built, goes on hold. Isabella finished firmly. Family first. Always. The flight to Ho Chi Minh City was the longest 12 hours of Jerry's life. The air in the hospital was thick with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken anxiety. His mother was stable but weak, the doctors explaining in rapid Vietnamese that she'd need surgery, recovery time, ongoing care. His father, now 67 and suddenly looking fragile, kept apologizing for ruining Jerry's important work. This is more important, Jerry said, holding his mother's hand in the hospital room. But even as he said it, his phone buzzed with messages from Netflix, from his team, from journalists wanting interviews about the series launch. Isabella called daily, managing the crisis from Melbourne. The premiere's been pushed back 2 weeks, she reported. Netflix isn't happy, but they understand. What she didn't tell him was that their main competitor had rushed out a similar immigrant story series, capturing the momentum they'd built, or that 2 of their key team members had been poached by other production companies, or that the Department of Social Services was reconsidering their educational module deal due to the delays. By week 3, Jerry's savings were draining fast, medical bills, time off work, the cost of maintaining his team while producing nothing. His automated YouTube empire, neglected for months, was showing declining numbers as algorithms punished inactive channels. Come back, Isabella urged during one of their video calls. Jerry's mother is stable. I can't hold this together much longer on my own. Jerry looked through the hospital window at the chaotic streets of Ho Chi Minh City, then at his mother sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. 10 years of building his life in Australia, and one phone call had pulled him back to where it all started. For the first time since leaving Vietnam, Jerry wasn't sure which country felt like home anymore. The call came at 2 a.m. Melbourne time. Jerry was sleeping in the hospital chair beside his mother when Isabella's panicked voice crackled through the phone. Jerry, it's over. Netflix pulled the plug. Jerry stepped into the hallway, his heart pounding. What do you mean pulled the plug? The competitor series launched yesterday. Same concept. Bigger budget, celebrity narration. Netflix says our market window is closed. Isabella's voice was breaking. They're invoking the delay clause. We get nothing. Jerry slumped against the hospital wall. 3 years of work gone. But that wasn't the worst part. There's more, Isabella continued. Someone leaked our production notes, our contact list, everything. Half our interview subjects are now in the competitor series. They're calling it New Australians Untold Stories. Who leaked it? Sarah. The name hit Jerry like a physical blow. His COO, his trusted partner for 3 years. The memory of her cold efficiency now stung with betrayal. She took a producer role with them. Took our entire format. Our research. The line went dead. Jerry tried calling back, but Isabella's phone went straight to voicemail. Back in the room, Jerry's mother stirred awake.
Gone.
She whispered in Vietnamese.
Jerry looks terrible. What's wrong?
But Jerry couldn't find words. His phone was exploding with notifications, angry messages from team members who hadn't been paid, lawyers talking about breach of contract, his business manager warning that his automated channels were hemorrhaging subscribers due to neglect. Then the worst message of all, from his accountant. Jerry, urgent. Jerry's business accounts are frozen. Tax audit triggered by large international transactions. Need Jerry back in Australia immediately. Jerry stared at the message, then at his mother's concerned face, then at the chaos of Ho Chi Minh City outside the window. His Australian dream was collapsing in real time, 8,000 kilometers away, and he was powerless to stop it. His phone buzzed again. Isabella. Jerry, I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. I'm going back to my social work. I'm done. Jerry's hands shook as he read the message. Everything he'd built, his business, his series, his relationship, his future, was crumbling simultaneously. The immigrant's nightmare, losing everything he'd fought for, trapped between two worlds, belonging to neither. Jerry sat in the hospital corridor at 4 a.m., staring at the string of devastating messages. His mother was stable, but needed surgery. His business was frozen, his life's work stolen. Everything was falling apart. Then his phone rang. Isabella. Jerry, I'm at the airport. His heart clenched. The airport? A cold dread snaked through him. He couldn't quite grasp it, but in the chaos of his collapsing world, a whisper of fear told him he was about to lose her too. Isabella. I'm flying to Vietnam, you idiot. Her voice was fierce, determined. I'm not leaving you to fight this alone. Jerry felt tears he'd been holding back for weeks finally break free. But Jerry's job, the social work, can wait. We're partners, remember. In everything. Her voice softened. I've been thinking about what Jerry said. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters. 18 hours later, Isabella arrived at the hospital with 2 suitcases and a laptop bag. She'd spent the flight working, and her first words weren't about the collapsed deal or the frozen accounts. I found something, she said, pulling out her laptop in the hospital cafeteria. Sarah made a mistake. She stole our format, our contacts, but she didn't steal our secret weapon. What secret weapon? Isabella smiled, the first genuine smile Jerry had seen in weeks. The families trust us. Not Netflix, not Sarah, not some celebrity narrator. They trust Jerry and Isabella, the couple who sat in their kitchens and listened to their stories. She showed him her screen, dozens of messages from their interview subjects, outraged about the competitor series. They're calling it exploitative, rushed, missing the heart of their stories. Hassan started a petition, Isabella continued. Mrs. Nguyen is organizing a boycott. The Cambodian Community Association wants to partner with us directly. Jerry stared at the screen. But we have no funding, no platform. YouTube. Isabella's eyes lit up. Jerry's original platform. We bypassed the networks entirely. Crowdfunded, community-supported, completely independent. Jerry's mind raced. His frozen business accounts, the tax audit. None of that mattered for a grassroots campaign. The automated channels are still generating revenue in Jerry's personal accounts, enough to fund this properly. Isabella grabbed his hands. Jerry, we don't need Netflix. We never did. We need each other and the communities who trust us. As if summoned by their conversation, Jerry's phone buzzed. A message from Hassan. Jerry, Isabella, my medical colleagues want to contribute funding. We believe in Jerry's vision. When can we start? Then Mrs. Nguyen. The Restaurant Association will sponsor episodes. We support our storytellers. Then Ahmed from the corner shop. My brother has video equipment. Whatever Jerry needs. Jerry looked at Isabella, then at the messages flooding in, then at the hospital room where his mother was recovering. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe. Partners? He asked. Isabella kissed him, there in the hospital cafeteria in Ho Chi Minh City, surrounded by the chaos of their collapsed empire and the birth of something new. Partners, she confirmed. Always. 3 months later, Jerry and Isabella sat in their makeshift studio, no longer the sleek Fitzroy apartment, but Mrs. Nguyen's restaurant after closing hours. The red plastic chairs had been pushed aside to make room for camera equipment, funded by community donations, and Jerry's remaining YouTube revenue. Episode 12 is live, Isabella announced, refreshing their independent YouTube channel. 2 million views in the first day. Their grassroots series had become something unprecedented. Each episode was sponsored by different community organizations, filmed in locations that mattered to the subjects: family restaurants, community centers, people's homes. The production values were rawer than Netflix standards, but the authenticity was undeniable. Jerry's mother had recovered fully and was visiting Melbourne for the first time. She sat in the corner quietly proud, watching her son and his girlfriend edit their latest episode about a Vietnamese war bride who'd built a textile empire. "You know what the best part is?" Jerry said, watching the comment section fill with responses from other immigrants sharing their own stories. "Sarah's series got cancelled after 6 episodes. Turns out stealing format isn't the same as understanding purpose." Isabella smiled, but Jerry could see the exhaustion in her eyes. They'd been working 18-hour days for months, rebuilding from nothing. The tax audit had been resolved. Jerry's accounts unfrozen after proving his international transfers were legitimate business expenses. But the stress had taken its toll. "Isabella," Jerry said quietly, "I need to ask you something." She looked up from her editing timeline. "Marry me." The words hung in the air above the smell of lingering pho and the hum of computer fans. Isabella's hands stilled on the keyboard. "Jerry, I know it's not romantic. I know we're broke and exhausted and sitting in a restaurant that smells like fish sauce. But I also know that when everything fell apart, Isabella got on a plane. When I had nothing left, Isabella reminded me what I actually had." Jerry reached across the table. "I want to build something with Isabella that can't be stolen or cancelled or audited. I want to build a family." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. Behind them, Jerry's mother was pretending not to eavesdrop while furiously texting what Jerry assumed were wedding plans to his father. "Yes," Isabella whispered. "Yes, but on one condition. Anything. We do the wedding episode as part of the series. 2 immigrants' kids finding love through storytelling. Mrs. Nguyen can cater." Jerry laughed, the sound echoing through the empty restaurant. "Deal. But I'm not wearing a suit that matches the plastic chairs." "We'll see about that." Isabella grinned and kissed him while their community-funded empire hummed quietly around them. The Australian dream had evolved one final time, from survival to success to significance to something simpler and more profound. Home, built one story at a time.